It is January 31st. Is the last day of January 2021, and man, has January gone by so quickly with so many surprises. Um, so last time we read about Joseph being reunited with his father, and Jacob meeting Pharaoh and what that meant, why that interaction was so significant. Um, yeah, the fact that Pharaoh submitted himself to Jacob, and what Jacob had seen in his lifetime, the unique things that Jacob saw that no one else will ever see, as far as ancestry, as far as great 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 grandparents. So yeah, let's we're gonna pick up right where we left off. But let's pray first. Father in heaven, Father, thank you for every day that you give us. Father, thank you for each morning you wake us and give us breath. Father, thank you for your word and every opportunity we have to read, to dive into it, and to learn from it. Father, open our minds and our hearts for the things that will bless our lives, the things that you want us to hear, the things that you want us to understand. Father, help us to understand your word and the lessons learned from the prophets and those who have gone before us. In Jesus' name, amen. So, without any ado, let's just kick off where verse 13, Genesis chapter 47, verse 13. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. So I talked about this last time, how this wasn't just a 1 or 2 year drought. You know, all of us have probably at one point or another witnessed or been a part of, recognized a drought. I know here in South Carolina where it rains all the time, and during the summer it's usually very plush and green. The grass grows like crazy. We don't have to cultivate the grass at all. In fact, people park on their lawns. That's how hardy lawns grow out here. But there was one year where it didn't rain for almost, it was well over a month. It was more than 30 days. And the grass everywhere was completely brown and burnt. And that's the only time I've ever seen that here in South Carolina. And it was a drought. We had a drought that year. But this was going on with Egypt and with the surrounding land was no comparison to the little droughts and the little dry seasons we see here. People were dying. Nations were crumbling because of the lack of rain. Now, I mentioned this before that this very well could have been the first drought after the flood. But this was definitely the worst one to this point. So, as we see in verse 13, when it says there was no bread, we're not talking about there was little bread, there was little food. People were starving. Verse 14, and Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. I mentioned this before. Until this point, Egypt, yes, was a well-established, wealthy, powerful nation. But we will now see how Egypt rises to be the superpower of the land. That Egypt becomes the richest, the most powerful nation because of what Joseph did for Egypt. So, verse 14. And let's go to verse 15. And when the money failed in the land of Egypt. So everybody's bringing their money. And so all the physical wealth, all the material wealth, all the currencies, gold, silver, jewels, gems, stones, all that type of stuff has flooded into Egypt. And now Egypt has all the wealth, not only of its own citizens, of the Egyptians, but has all the wealth of the surrounding land, of Canaan, of everybody affected by the drought. And so continuing in verse 14, oh, sorry, 15. And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came into Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth." And Joseph said, "Give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if money fails." So now Joseph is trading the corn for assets, for cattle, for livestock. And this isn't just Egypt, this is all the surrounding land. So now Pharaoh, and it's interesting that before this there was some independence with Pharaoh and the people of Egypt. Pharaoh was not a typical monarch that had claim over all of his land and could do with it however he wanted. There was some property rights, there was some personal rights that had to do with the Egyptians. And we can see this because the money that comes into Pharaoh comes into his house directly. Previous to this, people owned their own cattle, and now Pharaoh will have claim and own all the cattle. Verse 17, and they brought their cattle into Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, and for the flocks, and for the cattle, and for the herds, and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle, for that year. Now remember, last time we read about how Pharaoh, when he met Joseph's brothers, said, "If there are any of you that are good with managing cattle, with raising cattle, bring them to me, and I will let them raise my cattle." It seems to me that was Joseph bringing his family into Egypt, and people starting to barter and buy corn from Pharaoh with their cattle coincides with each other, because now Pharaoh has all this cattle, horses and sheep and goats and whatnot, and who's going to take care of them? So now he's saying, look, he says to Jacob's sons, he says, look, if you will take care of my cattle for me, then I will take care of you. So it seems to me that things happen just as God, as God has it do, that things happen in the right time and the right place. So it's easy for Pharaoh to say, "Give me all your wealth," and then to store it away somewhere. But bring me all your cattle. Those cattle still need to be tended to and taken care of. So interesting. Verse 17, and they brought their cattle into Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses and for their flocks, for their cattle, for their herds, for their asses. And he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, "We will not hide it from my Lord, how that our money is spent. My Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my Lord, but our bodies and our lands." So the people have given up all their money for food. Now they've given up all their cattle, and now they're saying, we're not going to pretend that we have given you all of our stuff and we have stuff, we're not going to say that we gave you all of our money and cattle and still have some back at home, pretending that, we're destitute. They're saying, we are absolutely destitute. We have given you all of our money. We have given you all of our cattle. What can we give you now? And so Joseph goes to the next level. He says, they say, what do we have now besides our bodies and our lands? And so Joseph is going to barter for lands and for people, being indentured servants to Pharaoh for food. 19. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live and not die, that in the land be not desolate. So you can see how very quickly, within a few years, Egypt becomes the most powerful, the most wealthy nation. Now people are coming to the bartering with their own bodies, with their lands. They're saying, we will give you lands, just what? But they're making a great argument too. They're saying, what does it profit Egypt if we die and our lands go to waste? Take care of us, and we will give you the land, and therefore Egypt can still maintain or maintain the borders of its country. Verse 20, and Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. So again, up until this point, Pharaoh did not, even though Pharaoh was king, or he was the supreme leader, if you will, of Egypt, he did not own Egyptian land. He did, but he didn't own all of Egypt. He couldn't just walk around his kingdom and say, that is mine, that's mine, give it to me. But now he does. Now he has all the land of Egypt under his possession. Verse 23. Nope, let's see. Verse 20, and Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. 21, and as for the people who removed them to cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. So as they're selling their lands to Pharaoh for food, Joseph, or Pharaoh through Joseph, is now moving the people where he wants them. If there's a plot of land that, for whatever reason, we don't know if he did it in a benevolent way, where he was saying, okay, this land over here is doing better. Now that I own it, let's move more people over here so we can manage this land and survive. Or whether he moved them for political reasons, we don't know. But we do know now that he had the power to move people in his land as he willed. Nobody owned land, so therefore nobody could resist Pharaoh when he wanted them to move, for good or for bad. Verse 22, only the land of the city, only the land of the priest bought he not, for the priest had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. This sounds an awful lot like the Levites later on in Exodus and in Israel. How the Levites, they didn't have an inheritance. They didn't have anything that they could give their children, because they lived off of the people. Well, same thing here. The priests are already, they don't own anything as it is, so they're already relying on Pharaoh to provide for them. Therefore, Pharaoh didn't buy up their lands, because it was already dedicated to Pharaoh and their religion. Verse 23, then Joseph said unto the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. So that, like I said, it sounds like that now that Pharaoh has possession of all the land, he can move people to where there is more, the drought is severe, but there are still probably pockets of land that still are growing some. And so he's moving people around strategically to cultivate and nourish what land, what crops they have, in order to provide in order for Egypt and the land of Egypt to survive. Verse 24, and it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall ye own for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your household, and for food for your little ones. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in thy sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. Now, it seems to me, at first, Jacob's children, Joseph's brothers, the people of Israel in Goshen, were not subject to this. But there was obviously indebted servants, which indebted servants are people who they're not slaves, they will work for somebody that have agreed for a certain amount of time, who have agreed to pay off their debts. And that's what's going on here. All these people are becoming indebted servants. They're not slaves of Egypt. But I wonder how somehow that is part and parcel what led to the justification of Egypt enslaving Israel. If there was already indebted servants in the land, it's not difficult to move to slavery. And we've seen that in America's history, how originally when people came here to America, they were indebted servants. They would pay off their debts and then they were free. But that moved into slavery. So something to think about. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of the Lord, of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. Verse 26, and Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests, only which become not Pharaoh's. So the land of the priests, Pharaoh doesn't own. But he does own all the other land. And it's interesting when this account was written, because this record, this is not the original record of Joseph. There might have been first-hand records kept of Joseph, but this is not it. This is a summary, an abridgment of these events. And so whoever wrote this, whether it was Moses that wrote this or someone else, this is where we see a bridge of time. Because it says that, verse 26, Joseph made a law over the land of Egypt unto this day. So he's saying, even to this day, it's assumed that it's been 4 or 5, well, more closer to 500 or 600 years after this event that takes place with Joseph, that these things are written down. So for 400 or 500, 600 years, when we get to Exodus and the books of Moses, that law in Egypt still exists. Now, what is that law? A 5th part. What is that? That's a 20% tax. 20% of all they make and all of their increase has to go to Egypt. Boy, that sounds like America, if you tell me. Except for some pay a lot more and some pay a lot less. But there's some about that 20% tax that's been from the beginning of time. So, verse 27. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen. And they had possession therein and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die. And he called his sons Joseph and said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me, bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. But I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. It's interesting that they promised. Now, okay, so Jacob lived for 17 more years after he enters Egypt. He enters Egypt. We can speculate probably the third, maybe the fourth year of the famine. And so Jacob lives in Egypt well beyond the famine. After the famine's done, rains return, people start growing again. He still remains there, as well as Joseph's brothers. It's funny what comfort and money will do. That's, in my opinion, that was the motivating factor why they didn't all just pack up and leave again. Why they didn't leave Egypt. Jacob was old, he was tired, and he had a good thing going there in Egypt. He was secure, he was safe. His son was second in power in Egypt. Why would you want to leave? Now, he was very aware of the promise that God gave to his children, his posterity, that they would possess the land of Canaan. It might be that God appeared to him in a vision after the famine was done and things started getting back to prosperity. It may have been he had a dream where God visited him and told him, don't go back to Canaan yet. That the children are going to have to stay in Egypt for a period of time. So it's interesting that they, you never question, the famine's over, why didn't they go back? It's a good question. Because when you look forward and you see what happens to Israel, they become enslaved and things become very bitter for them. Did they stay because God told Jacob to stay there, or did they stay because it was too comfortable to leave? I don't know. But nonetheless, the famine was well over by the time Jacob actually dies. But he was so determined that he wanted to be buried with his fathers, with Abraham, Isaac, with their fathers, and their wives, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah. We'll read here in a minute that Jacob loved Leah enough to bury her with Sarah and Rebecca, where Rachel was not given that luxury. We'll read about that. So let's go on to Genesis chapter 48. Verse 48:1. And it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, behold, thy father is sick, and he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob, and said, behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. And Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said unto me, behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. So here, just like I was saying, God had promised Jacob the land of Canaan for his posterity. And so he's just rehearsing this to his son. Verse 4. And said unto me, behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee in all, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. And now the two sons of Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. So Jacob is saying that Joseph's sons, Manasseh, Ephraim and Manasseh, and unlike any of his other sons' children, he says that Ephraim and Manasseh will be counted among the tribes of Israel. They'll be counted as my sons. He adopts them as his foster children. Now they're obviously granted, they're his grandchildren, but he places them equal to the status of his other sons, which becomes significant later down the line where we read about the different tribes of Israel. There's the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, which none of the other sons of grandsons of Jacob were given that or awarded that blessing. Verse 6, and thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. Verse 7, and as for men, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan, in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath. And I buried her there in the way of Ephrath. The same is Bethlehem. Very significant. So here we see that Rachel, his favorite wife, who by all accounts should have been buried with Sarah and Rebekah in the cave of the patriarchs, what they call it, that she was not granted that I don't want to say prestige. She was not granted that honor. She died in travel when she was giving birth to Benjamin and was buried there along their travels. So she was not buried where he had hoped to bury her, but he buried Leah. We're not there yet. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Verse 8, and Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, who are these? And Joseph said unto his father, hold on just a minute. Yes, okay. Verse 9, and Joseph said unto his father, they are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. The eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them, and braced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself in with his face to the earth. It's interesting because in verse 12, Joseph brought them out from between his knees. These were not little children at this time because as we read before, Joseph had his children during the years of plenty. During the years of plenty is when Pharaoh set him up with his wife and he started having the children. So these children, and now this is towards the end of Jacob's life, as far as we understand. His children were born in the years of plenty. These children, it could be assumed that they were, I'm guessing, no younger than 7 or 8. Maybe 10 years old, and yet he brought them out from between his knees and bowed himself with his face to the earth. It makes me wonder if this, when you read this, you get a picture of little toddler children between his knees. It seems to me one of two things. Either this happened earlier, Jacob blessing Joseph's children, around the same time that he was blessing Pharaoh, when they would have been very young, or there's something that's missed that we don't understand about that phrase, between his knees. Maybe that meaning that they are his direct sons, his direct offspring. I don't know. It just seems like there's something's out of time here, because if this was at Jacob's, near Jacob's death, these boys would have been close to 20, because we know that Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years before he died. Joseph's sons were already born during the times of plenty, so they could have easily been 20, 25 if this was right before Joseph died, or right before Jacob dies. So, something to think about, just keeping the chronology going here. When did this take place? Did it take place shortly after Jacob got to Egypt, or did this take place right before he died? I don't know. So, verse 13, and Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand, because Ephraim was the older, because Ephraim was the younger. We'll get to this. Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand. So, Israel is directing Ephraim with his right hand facing Jacob, which would be Jacob's left hand. And that's because Ephraim is the younger of the two brothers. Towards Israel, again in 13, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim. So Jacob is essentially crossing his arms when he's blessing the two. Upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guided his hand wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, and said, God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day. The angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. So Jacob is giving this blessing, and it takes a minute, it seems to me, that it takes a minute for Jacob or Joseph to recognize that Jacob's hands are crossed, and that Jacob's right hand is on the younger and his left hand is on the older. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn, but the right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son. See, notice the contrast between Isaac's blessing on Jacob, which was done under the guise of deceit. Jacob appearing to Isaac in disguise as his older brother and receiving the blessing. And here, in a way, we are seeing the same thing play out, where the younger son gets the birthright. And Joseph is saying, wait a minute, no, you got this wrong. Thinking that Jacob is mistaken, or his eyes have deceived him. And Jacob says, whoa, not so, my son. Hold on, I know what I'm doing. He said, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he shall be great. But truly this younger brother shall be the greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. So therefore Ephraim is being blessed as the birthright son. Who is the younger? Jacob was the younger of the two, and he got the birthright too. So, interesting. Verse 20. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God, make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And that throws you for a loop sometimes, because throughout reading the Bible, and when people are talking, they're always talking about Ephraim and Manasseh. They always mention Ephraim first. Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh. You never hear Manasseh and Ephraim. It's always Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim being the younger of the two. Verse 21, and Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the land of the Amorite, with my sword and my bow. That's interesting. Not that he gave him a portion of all of his inheritance. Jacob says, I have given you an extra portion of the stuff, of the loot, or of the bounty that I have out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. So obviously he had a confrontation with the Amorites. He conquered, received, you always get the bounty of conquering a city. And we will learn that the Amorites will give Israel a lot of problems. And there's a lot of bad blood when Israel goes back to the land of Canaan. And we'll get there. Verse 49, or chapter 49. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So here we go. Jacob is receiving revelation and visions, and he's going to bless each of his sons with guidance and warning as to what he has seen in these visions. Verse 2, Gather yourselves together, and hear ye, sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Who's speaking here? Because Jacob's not talking in first person. It's a narrator. Is it Joseph speaking? We don't know, because it says, Gather yourselves together, and hear ye, sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Sounds like it might be an angel speaking to them, or God speaking to them. Verse 3, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentst up to thy father's bed, then defiledst thou it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitation. Remember, Simeon and Levi were the ones who went and wiped out the city of Shechem. They were the brothers of Dinah, who was taken advantage of by the son of Shechem. Verse 6, O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly, mine honor be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Verse 8, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. And it's interesting, as you go through the biblical history, how all of this plays out just as Jacob prophesies. Judah, all the tribes of Israel bow down to Judah eventually. Judah is a lion's whelp from the prey. My son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. And to this day we attribute Jews, being of the tribe of Judah, who continue to live the law of Moses. So God's law has continued through Judah's name. Verse 11, binding the foal unto the vine and his ass colt unto the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine and his teeth white with milk. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. Issachar is a strong ass crouching down between two burdens. And he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulders to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at last. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a hind let loose. A hind is a deer. He giveth goodly words. Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The branches have sorely grieved him, and shot at him, and hated him. But the bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the Almighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by the God of thy fathers, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessing of heaven, above blessing of the deep, that lieth under blessing of the beasts and of the womb. The blessings of thy father hath prevailed above the blessings of thy progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of his head of him that was separate from his brethren. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is it, that their father spake unto them, and blessed them. Every one according to his blessing he blessed them. And he charged them, and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is the field of Machpelah, which is beyond Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. There they buried Abraham, Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there they buried Leah. There it is. So Leah is buried with the patriarchs, but Rachel was not given that honor. Verse 31. Nope, verse 32. The purchase of the field of the cave that is in therein was from the children of Heth. And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed and yielded up the ghost, and was gathered unto his people. Now verse 32. We know that Shem was still alive when Abraham purchased the cave from the Hittites, who are the children of Heth. It says right here in verse 32, from the children of Heth. Was Heth still alive? Was Ham still alive? We don't know. It doesn't say. We never hear how long the descendants of Ham. We go through the descendants of Ham back further in Genesis, but it never gives their age like it does when we're following the patriarchs. Could Jacob have been alive, or could some of Ham and Japheth's children have been still alive when Jacob was alive? Kind of like when we went through last time through rehearsing Jacob seeing the patriarchs die after 400 or 500 years of living. Anyways, don't know. It's just interesting that he points out in verse 32, was from the children of Heth. And so here Jacob dies. And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into his bed and yielded up the ghost and was gathered unto his people. And there's the life of Jacob. It's interesting that for a short, Jacob lived less than Abraham and Isaac. Not a lot of Genesis is dedicated to Isaac. Some to Abraham, but Jacob takes up a big portion of Genesis. And it's setting up the stage for what comes after. Jacob was the pivotal point, was the backstory, the beginning of the rest of the Old Testament. It was, when we read of Israel, there were his posterity. And it's interesting, when we pick up, next time we start, we're getting very close to where we see Israel explode. We see them just become very numerous in population. We'll leave it at that. I hope this was informative and beneficial. I love, it doesn't matter how many times I read through this narrative. I love this narrative. I love reading through the book of Genesis. So have a wonderful day, and we've gone long enough. We'll see you next time. God bless.